Welcome to the Literacy Lunch Break. Today we are joined by Christine Quesada, the Assistant Director of the Literacy and Humanities Bureau of the New Mexico Public Education Department. Christy, we are so excited to have you join us today. To get us started, I know you have served in many different roles and capacities, so we would love to hear just a little background about your experience in education and what really inspired you to focus on literacy.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Well, the last thing I wanted to do when I was growing up was to become a teacher, since I'm the daughter of two former principals from Dallas ISD, and also former teachers. I saw how hard they worked and how stressful it was. But a couple of years after I graduated from college with my undergrad, I found myself working for an organization in East Texas called Humanities in Schools. And I worked with at-risk high school students who I absolutely loved. And they inspired me to go into teaching because I kept fighting it and pushing it off. Said, no, I don't want to do this. And so now I'll be entering my 23rd year of education with the next school year beginning. I spent 13 years in the classroom as a second or first grade teacher. I taught 3 years in El Paso, Texas, and then we moved here to New Mexico. And so then I taught second grade for about 10 years there. And now I also have 7 years as an instructional coach and coordinator. And now I have been with the New Mexico Public Education Department for almost 2 years. And I love the work that I'm doing. When I was in my previous school district, I was supporting elementary schools with elementary foundational skills. And that kind of prompted my literacy journey and passion for literacy. Yeah. And so now I am supporting the structured literacy initiatives statewide, which include letters training. I also have an amazing structured literacy team who helps carry out this work. And during the time when I was in my former school district, my son was diagnosed with dyslexia. And so it made it even more meaningful.
Right.
And one of the big reasons, too, of why I'm so passionate about this work. And I'm even now beginning a doctoral program with Mount St. Joseph University.
That's amazing.
I'm in the fourth cohort of this program. The first cohort ever just graduated in May. And we just had our summer literacy institute this past week.
I saw that.
Which was wonderful.
That's excellent. That's amazing, right? Because you were like, I'm not going into education. I see how hard my parents work. And then here you are serving in so many roles and capacities and then just continuing to dig in, which is amazing. And also what makes leaders great. Especially that wide range of experience. So I heard you say you kind of started at that community level, and that really that's what kind of drove you into that education space. Can you share just a little bit more about what about that experience really led you to education? Because I think that's really important as we think about ensuring that all children have access to literacy and becoming readers and that connection to our community.
Yes. So when I worked for Humanities in Schools, I was working with high school students, at-risk students, and they were at risk for, many different reasons. And it was more social work. So I had a caseload and I had to make sure that I had so many touches, like conversations or provided activities or some kind of support for them. And with that, you get to know the kids and you get to see the difference that you're making. And it really, that's what drove me. I was thinking, okay, well, maybe teaching wouldn't be so bad because I adored the kids. And, and it's funny, I have one of the students on my Facebook. She found me a few years ago and, asked if I was the same person. And I had serviced her and her two siblings, her brother and her sister.
Oh, see, the
So,
opportunity to make that impact, right? It's nice.
yeah,
That's one nice thing about social media is that you can sometimes get to connect and see the work that you've done and where it's gone.
yes.
So I know you're working, at that state level. And so this series really is targeting leadership. And we really want to highlight the importance of leadership. Everyone in education serves a really impactful role, from the teachers that are working with students day to day, but it is also really important for us to understand leaders matter and knowledge in leadership matters. And so when we look at the different levels, state level, school level, district level, let's start just with that state literacy level. And we would love for you to share some of the key statewide initiatives that New Mexico has implemented to ensure and enhance literacy instruction in elementary education.
Okay. Well, in 2019, legislation passed our structured literacy and dyslexia law. And that is what prompted New Mexico to really get on this to support students in reading. With that law came the expectation that all elementary teachers, K through 5, would receive training in structured literacy from an accredited program, and that all first grade students would be screened for characteristics of dyslexia. And a working group was formed right after that bill, Senate Bill 398, was passed, to start looking at different programs to provide the training for the teachers. And a lot of funding came with this. And through that work, LETTERS was chosen as our accredited program to provide training for elementary teachers. And so LETTERS training began in 2020 with our first grade teachers getting trained in that first year. And then in 2021, we wrapped in kindergarten and second grade teachers. We've been doing this phased in approach every year. And so then after that, we brought in third grade teachers. Last year, we wrapped in fourth grade.
Wow.
And this next school year, we'll begin with fifth grade teachers. And all along the way, special education teachers have been trained as well, and reading interventionists as well as principals.
I love that you are, because oftentimes we hear about LETTERS training and we really hear, that K2 band getting that support, but just ensuring that 3, 4, 5, that reading interventionists and special education teachers also have access to LETTERS. I know a lot of states have passed legislation. I've heard, a lot of LETTERS training occurring across states, and that is amazing and so impactful. But I know one of those major challenges is, how do you do that, right? How do you ensure that teachers have the time and the energy, as we talked about how hard teaching is that we're teaching all day, and then basically we're going back to college, right? And we're going to start to learn this, so critical, but also pretty intense expectations and learning. So could you share a little bit more of clearly you phased it in, so it's not, everybody's doing this all at the same time, but what does that look like for teachers, and what are some of the challenges, and what are some of the ways you've overcome the challenges to ensure teachers can be trained?
Okay. And so with the passing of the legislation and each year since, school districts and charter schools have received funding. They receive a structured literacy allocation. And with that money, they are able to provide stipends for teachers who spend time outside of the duty day working on LETTERS coursework or attending facilitated sessions. And there's no way it can be done during the workday. And they shouldn't have students in the classroom when they're attending facilitated sessions either. And so, but it is up to the LEAs to decide whether how they want to spend that funding, because they could also use it to purchase materials for supplemental, or if they don't have a core program, they could use it for that as well. But with as much time as teachers spend in LETTERS training, I always recommend that they spend it on stipends for teachers, because it is so much work. And beginning during COVID was not ideal, but at the same time, we couldn't wait because our students need us. And New Mexico is last in the state according to our NAEP scores and have been for the last few years. And so we cannot wait.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, right? Because we've talked about this quite a bit on the podcast of, this for so many teachers, this is new learning. It's a mind shift, where a mindset shift where we thought one thing and teachers want to do best, right? They want to provide the best instruction for students. That's never a question. So when you are kind of confronted with this fact of, ooh, maybe this hasn't been the way we should teach reading, and there's this large shift, we want to be mindful of the amount of work and effort that takes. But at the same time, what we do know is you really can't wait, right? Like this has to get done because we have students in our classroom and we know what happens if we're not providing that strong foundation for them, how much more work it takes to get them caught up. Yes, so we've kind of talked about some of the challenges in really making change, right? Of recognizing we kind of have to make the shift. We need to maybe build teacher knowledge. We need to provide resources. Are there any other challenges that you can think of that really stick out to you as you've started to make a shift in instruction that stick out to you? And then how were those addressed?
Yes. So when teachers finish letters training, and it is a 2-year program, they go through it and, depending on the pace, but usually they're digesting this information quickly, and then they're going into the classroom and teaching, and sometimes forget some of the strategies that they're learning. And so we're trying to support teachers, after their training as well. One way that we're doing this and also supporting teachers who are starting letters is through one of our initiatives for structured literacy model and support schools. And so these schools apply for a grant, and we have, we'll be starting our 3rd year with this initiative. A couple of years ago, we started with, 4 model schools and 32 support schools. And last year, we doubled those numbers.
Wow.
This year, we're not able to double again because of funding, but we will have about 79 model and support schools total. And these schools receive a grant as well as a structured literacy coach that is assigned to them. And this coach receives extensive training and supports the elementary teachers who are going through letters as well as those who have completed letters. And so they receive a lot of training and coaching, and then they implement that coaching with teachers. And we have 2 different models that the coaches have been able to, work together. It's a little challenging at first, but we've done some work around observation, feedback, coaching cycle, and we've also done some work with Dr. Daryl Mickle with student-focused coaching. And, the training really is amazing that they're receiving. And the schools that we're working with this year, we've tried to focus on those with high needs. We're looking at the screener data, the screener for characteristics of dyslexia. We call it a dyslexia screener, but it's not screening for dyslexia.
Right.
It's looking for those characteristics and students who struggle so that intervention can be provided right away.
There's so many things as I'm listening to you talk, I'm like, it's excellent because there were so many challenges as we think about. It's not just giving the knowledge to teachers, right? So we have this letters training, and that's so impactful. But then you're also addressing, okay, it's great we have this knowledge, but how do we apply it in the classroom? What does this look like with kids in front of us? Mm-hmm. And then as we have that support, I heard you mention the support that you're also giving your coaches. How do we provide feedback? How do we look and really have that student-centered focused coaching, which is absolutely phenomenal. So as we think about, making this change and we identify, yes, we need to make this shift, this conversation is so impactful because it shows how many different components, how many layers how many layers consist of, really making change. It's not just giving teachers knowledge, but it's really being there for that sustainable support. Now, within those model classrooms or buildings, do then other teachers from the district come and observe instruction to see what this instruction looks like? Or are they just kind of like highlighting the shifts and changes in their classroom and then that's being shared out district-wide? What does that look like?
I'd say a little bit of both. There are some districts who want to be involved and want to make sure that we are all saying the same thing. And so it depends on the district.
Okay.
Sometimes the coach is communicating with the principal who is then communicating with the district. So many different ways. But the structured literacy coach works very closely with the administrators. And then we also have another program for schools who are not a model or support school. It's called School-Based Literacy Leaders. And so with this initiative, we're supporting 50 teachers or coaches who also receive the same observation, feedback, and coaching cycle training, and then support at least 2 teachers at their site. And so, we're trying to extend our reach to as many schools and school districts as possible. And then we work with the University of New Mexico Project ECHO to support teachers who have completed letters training. And that we piloted a couple of years ago, and last year we finished our first year. And so these teachers also receive some training and they're able to collaborate and talk with teachers from across the state, which they find valuable because they don't get that, and especially with some of those rural schools or school districts, they don't have the opportunity. They might be the only second grade teacher on their team.
And that collaboration is so critical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So as I'm listening to you, I'm just hearing a lot of themes, right? So it's the teacher knowledge building, but it's also that sustainable support of what happens after we give that knowledge, the opportunity for communication and collaboration and support with the coaching. As you are implementing these initiatives, how are you measuring the impact? Because we know this is all great support, but how are we then, I'm just thinking as a leader, okay, we're putting something in place. How do we measure the impact? What should we, kind of pour into more? Maybe what's not working as well. So that can be a tricky thing to do. So what are some ways that you're measuring the impact of these initiatives?
So statewide, we use iStation as our universal screener. And that's the data that's being measured to see growth. And with what we've seen in the last year, those schools who are receiving the structured literacy grant and the support with the coach at their site, those are the ones that are showing more growth at this time.
Excellent.
And I'm not saying it's amazing growth just yet, but we are working on it and we are starting to see that growth.
Yeah. And that's what you want to see, right? It does take time, but when you see it moving upward and you see that growth, that's what's so impactful. Mm-hmm. Well, I could, sit and talk to you for hours, but I know, we try to keep these sessions short so teachers and leaders can take a listen and, just hopefully learn something, spark some interest. One of the things I do always like to ask before we end is, if there's one key takeaway, if you whether it's a teacher or a leader, any educator listening to this podcast, and they're in a school, a district, or even at that state level, and they're recognizing that need for change, that can seem, like a big mountain to climb. There's a lot of steps in that. If there was one key takeaway from listening today, what would you want them to be able to walk away with?
I would want them to be able to stay the course. It is a hard fight, and especially if you're maybe the only person in your school who feels this way or sees what needs to be done. Continue educating yourself so that you can educate those around you. And we want everybody to be on the same page. We want everybody to be providing structured literacy instruction and practices, evidence-based practices, using what you learn in letters to implement in the classroom. It's not easy and it does take time. And even after going through letters training, we don't want it to be a one and done. We want to
Right.
provide teachers that support with coaching and additional collaboration. Um, Speaking with your leaders, I think, is something else that needs to be done, because sometimes the administrators, if they're not on board, it's going to be hard to implement this not only in your school, but also in your classroom. And so educate yourself and educate those around you.
I love that. Educate yourself and those around you, and stay the course. Christy,
Yes.
thank you so much for all that you do in education, and thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you for having me, Marjorie.
Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we explore literacy topics in a snack-sized, easily digestible format.